Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of Sleepless History, where we delve into the past with a sprinkle of humor and a touch of the absurd. Today, we embark on a rather peculiar journey, one that involves a man, a plane crash, and a deserted island in the Pacific Ocean. Picture it. The year is 1980, and our protagonist finds himself completely alone, surrounded by nothing but wild animals and the relentless waves of the ocean. So grab your headphones, settle in, and prepare for a story that is equal parts harsh and hilariously absurd. Imagine the scene. Our hero, let's call him Bob, is enjoying a leisurely flight when suddenly the plane's engine decides it has had enough of the sky. With a dramatic sputter and a whole lot of turbulence, Bob is thrust from the comfort of his seat into the wild unknown. After a chaotic descent, he finds himself washed ashore, dazed but miraculously alive. The only thing louder than the crashing waves is the sound of Bob's heart racing as he takes in his new surroundings. Now, being stranded on a deserted island might sound like a dream come true to some. Think of the tranquility, the sunbathing, the coconuts. But for Bob, reality quickly sets in. He realizes that the only companions he has are the local wildlife, which, to put it mildly, is a mixed bag. From curious monkeys to mischievous crabs, each day on the island is a new adventure in survival and slapstick comedy. Bob's first task is figuring out how to eat. Coconuts are plentiful, but cracking them open is like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube underwater. He spends an entire afternoon swinging a rock at a coconut, only to have it bounce back and smack him square in the forehead. "Great," he mutters. "Now I'm just a walking punchline." As days turn into weeks, Bob learns to adapt. He becomes quite the resourceful fellow, using palm fronds for shelter and improvising fishing tools from sticks and vines. However, his culinary skills leave much to be desired. What was once a coconut feast quickly turns into a game of guess what this sea creature is. Spoiler alert, Bob has no idea. One day he catches something that looks like a fish but smells like a gym sock. "Bon appetit," he declares, before promptly regretting his life choices. The real challenge, however, comes from his animal roommates. The monkeys see Bob as a source of entertainment, often stealing his makeshift fishing gear or tossing coconuts at him for fun. One particularly cheeky monkey, whom Bob affectionately names Bandit, takes a liking to Bob's shirt. In a classic game of tug-of-war, Bandit wins, leaving Bob shirtless and slightly embarrassed. "I didn't need that shirt anyway," he sighs. "It was getting a bit too fashionable for an island life." Days stretch into months, and Bob learns to embrace the quirks of his new life. He starts talking to the animals, convinced they understand him. "Listen, Bandit," he says one day, "if you keep stealing my food, I swear I'll teach you how to fish." The monkey, perched on a branch, tilts its head as if contemplating the offer. Bob chuckles to himself, realizing he might be losing his grip on reality. As time passes, Bob begins to develop a routine. He wakes up with the sun, stretches, and greets the day with a rousing rendition of "I Will Survive." Slightly off-key, but filled with enthusiasm. He forages for breakfast, tries not to trip over crabs that seem determined to make his life difficult, and spends the afternoons honing his fire-starting skills. After several failed attempts, he finally manages to start a fire, only to have it extinguished by a sudden rainstorm. "Of course," he mutters, "nature's way of reminding me who's boss." Despite the challenges, Bob finds joy in the little things. He discovers that he has a knack for crafting, turning driftwood into makeshift furniture and weaving palm fronds into surprisingly comfortable mats. He even creates a lounge area, complete with a coconut cup and a well-placed rock for a footrest. "I could sell this on Etsy," he muses, chuckling at the absurdity of the thought. As months turn into a year, Bob's solitude becomes both a blessing and a curse. He misses human interaction but finds solace in the companionship of his animal friends. Every night, he entertains himself by recounting his own version of epic tales, complete with dramatic sound effects and exaggerated characters. And then the mighty warrior Bob faced off against the ferocious Bandit the monkey, ruler of the Coconut Kingdom. Laughter echoes in the quiet of the night, even if it's just his own. But the island is not without its dangers. One fateful day, Bob encounters a wild boar. At first, he's fascinated. This is a real-life animal encounter. But as the boar charges at him, Bob quickly realizes that fascination won't save him from becoming a meal. He runs for his life, zigzagging like a cartoon character, and narrowly escapes by climbing a tree. Note to self, he thinks. Next time, just admire from a distance. Through all the ups and downs, Bob learns valuable life lessons. He discovers resilience he never knew he had, the importance of laughter in the face of adversity, and how to make a mean coconut smoothie. He even starts a journal documenting his thoughts and experiences. Though, let's be honest, it mostly consists of drawings of Bandit and daily rants about his lack of Wi-Fi. As the years go by, Bob's story becomes one of survival, humor, and the enduring spirit of humanity. He learns to appreciate the beauty of nature, the simplicity of life, and the hilarity of his situation. Who knew that being stranded on a deserted island could be such an unintentional comedy show? But perhaps the most profound realization comes when Bob encounters a passing ship. After years of isolation, he finds himself waving frantically, shouting for help. To his shock, the ship sails right past him, oblivious to his existence. He collapses onto the sand, laughing and crying at the same time. Well, at least I'm living my best life, he chuckles, wiping away a tear. And so, dear listeners, the story of Bob reminds us that life can be harsh, unpredictable, and downright absurd. Yet it's also filled with moments of laughter, resilience, and unexpected joy. Whether faced with a wild boar or a cheeky monkey, Bob navigated his island adventure with humor and grace, proving that sometimes the best way to survive is to find the funny side of things. So the next time you find yourself in a tough spot, remember Bob and his island antics. Embrace the wild, laugh at the absurd, and who knows, you might just discover a part of yourself you never knew existed. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, humor, and survival. Until next time, keep those spirits high and your laughter loud, because history may be sleepless, but we can always find joy in its tales. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Bob settled into his makeshift home, a cozy little tent crafted from palm fronds and a few sticks that had somehow decided to stay together. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore had become his lullaby, soothing him into a false sense of security, despite the wilderness that surrounded him. Each night, he gazed up at the stars, wondering if anyone out there was missing him, or if they simply figured he had taken an extended vacation from the daily grind. Ah, the daily grind. How he missed the mundane chaos of a 9-to-5 job. He could almost hear his boss's voice, barking orders, and rolling his eyes at Bob's questionable jokes. I'd trade 1,000 meetings for just one more cup of bad office coffee, he mused, shaking his head at how drastically his priorities had changed. One day, in a moment of desperation, Bob decided he needed to spice up his meals. After all, how many different ways can one eat coconut? He had already tried coconut stew, coconut salad, and if he was being honest, coconut-scented air. In his culinary quest, he encountered a particularly colorful parrot that had taken a liking to his cooking antics. Bob named him Chef Feathers and decided to consult with him on a new recipe. "All right, Chef Feathers," Bob said, holding up a particularly gnarly-looking sea urchin. "What do you think? Gourmet or just a fancy paperweight?" The parrot squawked in response, perhaps in agreement, or perhaps just because he liked the sound of his own voice. Bob took that as a sign of approval and went for it. He carefully pried the urchin open, but the contents inside were less than appetizing. "Well, Chef, this looks a bit like something that was rejected from a science lab," he chuckled. Nevertheless, Bob decided to give it a shot. After all, he was on an island, living like a true adventurer. How bad could it be? As he took his first bite, he immediately regretted his decision. It was like chewing on a rubber boot that had been marinated in the sea. "Note to self," he gasped, "sea urchins are not the 5-star delicacy I thought they'd be." Chef Feathers, perched nearby, squawked with what Bob interpreted as laughter. Yes, laugh it up, you judgmental bird," he retorted, swiping at the parrot playfully. Days turned into weeks, and Bob found himself developing a peculiar relationship with his animal companions. He had established a hierarchy of sorts among them, with Bandit the monkey reigning supreme as the self-proclaimed king of coconuts. Bob often caught Bandit lounging like royalty, munching on coconuts, while Bob did all the hard work of foraging and fishing. "Hey, you're supposed to be my sidekick. Not my overlord, Bob would shout, but Bandit just tilted his head, completely unbothered. One day, Bandit decided it would be a fantastic idea to introduce Bob to his distant cousin, a rather aggressive wild boar. Bob was minding his own business, attempting to catch fish, when he heard a rustling in the bushes. Out charged the boar, snorting and stomping as if it owned the place. "Oh, great," Bob groaned. "Now I'm being bullied by a pig." In a moment of sheer panic, Bob grabbed a nearby stick and waved it like a sword. "Back, foul beast! I have coconuts!" Surprisingly, this seemed to confuse the boar, which paused mid-charge, looking almost bemused. Bob took the moment to make a tactical retreat, backpedaling into the shallow waters. "Fight or flight, Bob! Fight or flight!" he muttered, half laughing at the absurdity of his situation. After a few days of avoiding the boar, Bob found himself yearning for some sort of interaction that didn't involve screaming at a wild animal. It was time for a new project, one that would distract him from his solitary existence. He decided to build a signal fire, not just any fire, but one that could be seen from miles away. He envisioned rescue ships sailing past and spotting his fiery beacon, acknowledging him as the island king he had become in his mind. Bob gathered every piece of driftwood, palm fronds, and, for good measure, even a few of Bandit's stolen coconuts to fuel this monumental effort. "If I'm going to be rescued, I might as well do it in style," he declared, motivated by visions of grandeur. After hours of painstaking work, the fire was finally lit, roaring to life with a satisfaction that made Bob feel almost victorious. "Look out, world! King Bob is open for business," he yelled, throwing his arms wide as if to embrace the island itself. But as the flames danced higher, Bob realized he had forgotten one crucial detail. He had no idea how to properly contain the fire. As the fire crackled, it began to spread beyond the confines Bob had intended. Panic set in as he scrambled to douse the flames with seawater, slipping and tumbling in the sand. "This is not how I envisioned my rescue," he shouted, battling the blaze, while Bandit watched from a safe distance, chittering as if to say, "Good luck with that, buddy." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Bob managed to extinguish the flames. He stood there, panting and covered in soot, looking at what was left of his grand signal fire. "Well, that was anticlimactic," he said to himself. "Maybe next time I'll just stick to waving my arms like a lunatic." As the days stretched into months, Bob found solace in the routine he had developed. He would wake up, engage in a morning dance to the sound of the waves, and even hold imaginary conversations with Chef Feathers about the philosophical implications of coconut-based cuisine. What if coconuts are actually sentient beings? He pondered one day, earning a skeptical look from the parrot. "All right, I'll stop talking to the bird," he laughed, realizing he might be a little too far gone. But then, something unexpected happened. One day, while Bob was foraging for food, he stumbled upon a hidden cove. The sun glistened off the water, and there, resting on the shore, was a large crate, partially buried in the sand. "What in the world?" he exclaimed, heart racing at the prospect of treasure. With newfound energy, he dug it out, praying it was filled with provisions, or maybe even a forgotten stash of beer. As he pried the crate open, Bob discovered it was filled with old surfboards and beach supplies. "Well, that's not exactly what I was hoping for," he sighed, trying to hide his disappointment. "But I guess I can start a surfing school for monkeys." After inspecting the surfboards, he found them surprisingly sturdy. "Why not?" he thought. "I've got nothing but time." Bob set about teaching Bandit and the other animals how to ride the waves, which mostly involved him tumbling off the board while the monkeys laughed hysterically from the shore. "This isn't exactly what I envisioned when I thought of island life," he chuckled, feeling slightly ridiculous but strangely fulfilled. As the months rolled on, Bob became quite the island legend among the local fauna. He was the eccentric man who danced with monkeys, tickled crabs, and attempted to surf on anything that floated. His days were filled with laughter, even if it was often at his own expense. But one fateful day, as Bob was lounging on his beach mat, a ship appeared on the horizon. His heart raced with excitement and disbelief. Could it be? My rescue is finally here! He jumped to his feet, waving his arms like a madman. "Hey, over here! I'm not a coconut, I'm a human!" The ship slowly approached, and Bob's dreams of returning to civilization felt within reach. He ran down to the water, still flailing his arms, his heart pounding in his chest. However, as the ship drew closer, Bob realized it was not a search and rescue vessel, but rather a group of tourists on a pleasure cruise, cameras in hand, capturing his wild antics for their social media feeds. Bob stood there, half in shock and half in laughter. "Well, this is a twist," he chuckled, realizing he had unwittingly become the star of someone else's vacation. The tourists cheered and laughed, snapping photos of the deserted island survivor. "At least I'll have a killer Instagram story," he joked, doing a little dance that sent the monkeys into fits of laughter. And just like that, Bob's life took another turn. He became the unofficial ambassador of the island, surrounded by newfound friends who came to visit, bringing with them snacks, stories, and tales of the outside world. He embraced his role, sharing his wisdom about coconuts and the importance of laughter in survival. As he sat on the beach, surrounded by his new friends, Bob couldn't help but reflect on his journey. From a frantic survivor to a local legend, his life had transformed in ways he never imagined. The harsh realities of being stranded had given way to an unexpected adventure filled with humor, resilience, and connections that transcended species. So, dear listeners, if there's one lesson to take away from Bob's story, it's this. Life may throw you into the wildest of situations, but with a little humor, a dash of creativity, and the willingness to embrace the absurd, you can turn even the harshest circumstances into a memorable adventure. Whether you're stranded on a deserted island or just navigating the chaos of everyday life, remember to find joy in the journey. Until next time, keep those spirits high and embrace the wildness of your own stories. As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, Bob woke up to the unmistakable sound of his alarm clock, the persistent squawking of Chef Feathers, who had taken it upon himself to become Bob's morning motivator. All right, I'm up," Bob grumbled, pulling himself out of his makeshift bed made of palm fronds and driftwood. Life on the island had settled into a bizarre routine, a blend of survival and slapstick comedy that made even the wild animals chuckle, though they communicated through a series of screeches, chirps, and the occasional well-timed monkey facepalm. Bob had become somewhat of a local celebrity among the animal kingdom, a title he never asked for but was more than willing to embrace, especially when it came to the perks of free entertainment. After a breakfast of half a coconut and what he could only describe as mystery berries, Bob decided it was time to tackle the most pressing issue of his island life: fashion. Yes, even stranded on a deserted island, one must consider their wardrobe choices. With Bandit the monkey as his personal stylist, Bob embarked on a quest to create the ultimate island outfit, something that screamed both survivor and fashionista. "Here's the plan, Bandit," he said, surveying his surroundings. "We need to find the softest leaves for a shirt and maybe some sturdy vines for a belt. I'm thinking a chic, draped look." Bandit tilted his head, as if contemplating the artistic merits of Bob's vision, before scampering off to gather supplies. The pair spent the morning rummaging through the underbrush, with Bandit occasionally trying to help by throwing leaves at Bob's head. "Fashion is a process, my furry friend," Bob laughed, dodging a particularly large frond. "No need to rush the art." After several hours of trial and error, Bob emerged with a leafy ensemble that was equal parts avant-garde and utterly ridiculous. He strutted around like a runway model, striking poses and twirling as Bandit clapped his paws together in approval. "Look out, Vogue! Here comes the next big thing," Bob declared, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he admired his reflection in the water. The outfit was a disaster, more like a salad than actual clothing, but it made him feel fabulous. Feeling empowered by his new look, Bob decided it was time to host the island's first ever fashion show. After all, what else did he have to do? He invited all his animal friends, including a skeptical Chef Feathers who perched on a branch with a critical gaze. Bob set up a makeshift runway made of driftwood and palm leaves, complete with a sign that read, "Welcome to the first annual Island Fashion Extravaganza." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Bob took to the runway, strutting and posing with all the flair he could muster. "And now presenting the Leafy Legend," he announced dramatically. The animals watched in wide-eyed fascination as Bob pranced around, occasionally tripping over his own feet but recovering with an exaggerated flourish. Bandit cheered him on, while a group of crabs clapped their claws in approval. Bob's confidence soared, and he felt like a superstar. That is, until he took one final dramatic turn and slipped on a particularly slippery piece of seaweed. With a comical yelp, he went tumbling into a pile of sand, sending a cloud of grains flying everywhere. "Well, that's one way to make an exit," he laughed, brushing the sand off his face as the animals erupted into what could only be described as raucous applause. At least, that's how he interpreted their excited chattering. Days continued to blend into each other, filled with laughter, culinary experiments gone wrong, and the ever-present antics of Bandit. Bob began to notice something peculiar. He was developing a strange rapport with the local wildlife. He could almost understand their grunts and squawks, interpreting them as encouragement or playful banter. "Ah, the universal language of survival," he quipped, rolling his eyes at his own absurdity. One evening, while lounging by the fire, Bob decided it was time to confront his greatest fear: loneliness. He stared into the flames, considering the vastness of the ocean and the isolation that came with it. "What if I'm stuck here forever?" he wondered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I never get rescued?" Just then, Bandit scampered over, offering Bob a half-eaten coconut as if to say, "Cheer up, buddy! You've got me!" Bob couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "You're right, Bandit. I'll take my coconut buddy over a boring office job any day." However, the solitude began to weigh on him more than he expected. One night, as he lay staring at the stars, he realized he hadn't had a real conversation with another human being in what felt like an eternity. "I could really use a good chat right about now," he sighed, imagining the conversations he'd have about everything and nothing. You know, the usual. What's your favorite pizza topping? Pineapple or not? In an attempt to stave off the creeping loneliness, Bob decided to create his very own talk show, complete with a host and audience. He gathered his animal friends, setting them up as the audience, and took center stage. "Welcome to the Bob Show," he announced, his voice booming with excitement. "Tonight we have a special guest, Chef Feathers, the most talented parrot in the Pacific." Chef Feathers squawked, looking both confused and slightly flattered. Bob pretended to interview him, asking questions that ranged from, "What's your secret to a perfect coconut souffle?" to, "How do you stay so colorful?" The other animals watched with mixed expressions of amusement and bewilderment, clearly unsure of what to make of this one-man production. Bob carried on for what felt like hours, switching between characters and voices, fully embracing the role of entertainer. And now, for our next segment, a dramatic reenactment of my first encounter with the wild boar. He leaped into a reenactment, flailing his arms and mimicking the boar's snorts, much to the delight of his animal audience. Even Bandit was rolling on the ground, clutching his belly in laughter. But the show couldn't go on forever. As the night wore on, Bob began to feel that familiar pang of loneliness creeping back in. He looked at the stars, wondering if anyone out there was thinking of him, missing him, or even looking for him. "Hey, universe, a little help here?" he called out, half-jokingly. "I could really use a sign that I'm not just a punchline in some cosmic joke." The very next day, as Bob was gathering his daily coconut supply, he stumbled upon a small, weathered bottle washed ashore. Curious, he picked it up and inspected it closely. Inside was a rolled-up piece of paper. Could it be? He thought, heart racing with anticipation. A message from another castaway? Or maybe a treasure map? With trembling hands, he uncorked the bottle and pulled out the note. As he unrolled it, he gasped in disbelief. "Congratulations! You've won a lifetime supply of nothing," the note read in bold letters. "Just kidding. You're stuck on an island. Enjoy your coconuts." Bob couldn't help but burst into laughter, the absurdity of it all hitting him square in the gut. "Well played, universe. Well played," he chuckled, shaking his head. "I guess I'm the punchline after all." As the days turned into weeks, Bob learned to embrace the unpredictable chaos of island life. He developed new hobbies, such as crafting sculptures out of seashells and sand, and even tried his hand at writing poetry, though most of it was about coconuts and the occasional monkey feud. "Roses are red, coconuts are brown. Life on this island makes me feel like a clown," he wrote, laughing at his own ridiculousness. One particularly eventful day, Bob decided it was time to host a feast for his animal friends. He gathered everything he could find: coconuts, some questionable sea creatures, and an assortment of berries, and invited everyone to join him for Coconut Palooza. He imagined it would be a grand celebration, complete with dancing and laughter. As the sun set, Bob lit a fire and laid out the spread, feeling a surge of excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever Coconut Palooza," he announced, throwing his arms wide as if he were addressing a massive crowd. The animals gathered around, their eyes gleaming with curiosity, and Bob felt a sense of pride wash over him. The feast began, and Bob tried to impress his guests with some culinary creativity. He made a seafood salad with whatever he could find, which turned out to be a combination of slimy seaweed and those mystery berries. "Bon appetit," he proclaimed, serving it with flair as he watched the animals cautiously approach the spread. To his surprise, the monkeys seemed to enjoy it, while Chef Feathers took a few pecks before looking up at Bob with a disapproving squawk. "I'll take that as a compliment," Bob laughed, though he couldn't help but notice Bandit's less than enthusiastic response as he tossed the food aside. As the night progressed, laughter filled the air, and Bob found himself at the center of it all, recounting his wild adventures and antics. The animals responded with their own sounds of approval, and for a moment, he felt like a king among his subjects. But then, disaster struck. In the midst of his storytelling, Bandit decided to show off his acrobatic skills, leaping from a tree branch right into the middle of the feast. The impact sent food flying everywhere, coconuts rolling, seaweed slapping against Bob's face, and berries splattering like confetti. Bob stood there, mouth agape, covered in an explosion of colorful mess, while the other animals erupted into chaos. Monkeys were swinging from trees, crabs scuttled away in a panic, and Chef Feathers took flight, squawking in disbelief. Bob burst into laughter, realizing he had just hosted the most chaotic Coconut Palooza imaginable. "Welcome to the wildest party in the Pacific," he yelled, laughing uncontrollably as he wiped the remnants of his feast from his face. "This is what island life is all about." As the night wore on and the chaos settled, Bob sat by the fire, reflecting on the roller coaster of emotions that had come with his time on the island. He had faced challenges, absurdities, and moments of sheer hilarity that had transformed his perspective on life. In that moment, surrounded by his animal friends, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life may have thrown him onto this island, but he had created a world filled with laughter, companionship, and unforgettable memories. So, dear listeners, as we wrap up this wild tale of survival and absurdity, remember that sometimes the harshest situations can lead to the most unexpected joys. Whether you find yourself stranded on a deserted island or navigating the complexities of everyday life, embrace the chaos, find humor in the absurd, and let your own adventures unfold. Until next time, keep your spirits high and your laughter louder, for life is an unpredictable journey worth savoring. As dawn broke over the island and painted the sky with soft pastels, Bob woke up feeling both refreshed and slightly disheveled. The remnants of last night's Coconut Palooza still clung to him like a bad hangover. He had managed to fall asleep in a pile of sand and leftover seaweed, a delightful reminder of his culinary catastrophe, and he groaned as he brushed the bits of nature off his body. "Morning, Bandit," he grumbled, spotting his furry friend perched on a nearby branch, munching on a coconut with a look of utter satisfaction. "I hope you're enjoying the remnants of my infamy." Bandit, ever the opportunist, glanced at Bob and then back at the coconut, seemingly unfazed by his human companion's predicament. Bob took a moment to gather himself and decided it was time to wash up. He made his way to the shoreline, where the waves lapped at the sand, inviting him into the cool water. "Ah, nothing like a morning swim to wash away the shame," he exclaimed, diving in with all the grace of a flailing dolphin. But as he emerged, he suddenly felt a sharp sting on his foot. "What the?" he yelped, lifting his foot out of the water to reveal a tiny crab clinging to his toe like a stubborn souvenir. "Hey, I didn't invite you to the party." After a brief struggle, Bob managed to dislodge the little crustacean, watching it scuttle away with an air of triumph. "One less pesky guest," he muttered, shaking his head. The ocean felt refreshing, but Bob knew he needed to move past the chaos of yesterday's festivities. It was time to focus on survival once more. Having lived on the island for a while now, Bob had developed a keen sense of resourcefulness. He had become quite the jack of all trades, inventing tools, crafting fishing spears, and even trying his hand at making a hammock out of palm fronds, though the first few attempts resembled a tangled mess rather than a cozy resting spot. That day, Bob decided it was time to venture deeper into the island's interior. He gathered a few essentials: a makeshift spear, a coconut for hydration, and of course, Bandit, who insisted on tagging along as his self-appointed sidekick. Together, they set off, ready to discover what other challenges and absurdities awaited them. As they trekked through the thick foliage, Bob couldn't help but admire the beauty of the island. "You know, Bandit," he said, pausing to gaze at the vibrant flowers and towering trees, "this place isn't half bad. It's got a certain charm. Just me, you, and all the wild animals. It's like a bizarre version of Survivor, minus the $1 million prize." Bandit chattered in response, as if he understood the sentiment perfectly. But the idyllic atmosphere was short-lived. As they wandered further into the jungle, Bob stumbled upon a clearing filled with fruit trees. "Jackpot!" he shouted, racing forward with newfound enthusiasm. He picked a few ripe bananas and held them up triumphantly. "Look at this! We're living like kings, Bandit! Bananas for days!" However, his celebration was cut short when he heard a rustling sound nearby. Bob's heart raced as he turned to see a wild boar, a different one this time, snuffling around in the underbrush. "Oh no, not you again!" he exclaimed, clutching the bananas as if they were some kind of shield. The boar spotted Bob and Bandit, and without hesitation charged toward them, snorting angrily. "Why does this always happen to me?" Bob cried, darting behind a tree as if it could offer any real protection. Bandit, on the other hand, decided this was the perfect time to showcase his impressive climbing skills, scrambling up the tree with agility that made Bob envious. "Thanks for the backup, sidekick!" Bob shouted, peeking out from behind the tree. The boar came to a skidding halt, confused by the sudden disappearance of its prey. Bob seized the opportunity. "Okay, Bob, think. How do you deal with a wild boar?" He glanced at the bananas in his hand and had a flash of inspiration. "Hey, over here, you big hunk of trouble!" he yelled, tossing a banana at the boar's feet. The boar paused, sniffing the offering curiously. "Yeah, that's right. You want a snack? How about a nice ripe banana instead of me?" To Bob's astonishment, the boar approached cautiously, eyeing the fruit. Bob couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of the situation. "I've got your number now. Who knew I could negotiate with wildlife?" The boar snatched the banana and began munching away, completely forgetting about Bob. "Look at that! I'm a pig whisperer," Bob exclaimed, feeling quite proud of himself. Bandit, still perched in the tree, chattered in disbelief as he watched his human companion pull off the most ridiculous negotiation in animal history. After a few minutes of feeding the boar more bananas, Bob decided it was time to make a strategic retreat. "All right, buddy. You enjoy your meal, and I'll be over here." "Not being a meal," he said, inching backward. He turned to leave, only to trip over a root, landing face first into a patch of soft mud. "Great. Just perfect," he groaned, trying to wipe the mud from his face as Bandit let out a series of high-pitched screeches, undoubtedly laughing at his misfortune. With mud splattered across his face and banana peels in hand, Bob made his way back to the beach, where he could wash off the remnants of his jungle adventure. As he reached the shore, he noticed a small pod of dolphins playing in the distance, jumping gracefully through the waves. "Now that's more like it," he smiled, briefly forgetting his muddied state. Feeling inspired, Bob decided to try his hand at fishing once again. He crafted a more refined spear this time, determined to catch something that didn't resemble a gym sock. "All right, fish of the ocean, prepare to meet your doom," he declared dramatically, brandishing his spear like a warrior. But fishing was no easy task. Bob spent hours standing at the water's edge, occasionally launching his spear with all the finesse of a toddler throwing a tantrum. The fish, however, were far smarter than he anticipated, dodging his every attempt. "Why do I feel like I'm in a cartoon right now?" he grumbled, watching as one particularly audacious fish swam past, flipping him the fin as if mocking his efforts. Just when he thought he would have to settle for another coconut dinner, something miraculous happened. He spotted a large fish swimming lazily in the shallows. "This is it. My moment of glory, Bob whispered to himself, crouching low and preparing for the perfect throw. He focused all his energy and hurled the spear with all his might, and missed completely. The spear flew off into the distance, landing harmlessly on the sand. Bob stood there, mouth agape, as the fish simply swam away, unbothered by his antics. "I can't believe this is my life," he muttered, feeling both defeated and utterly ridiculous. But Bob was nothing if not persistent. He picked up his spear and decided to try again, this time with a different approach. He waded into the water, determined to outsmart the fish. He crouched low, trying to blend in with his surroundings. "If I just act like a fish, maybe they'll think I'm one of them," he reasoned, making silly fish faces and flopping around in the water. After a few awkward moments of flailing about, he felt something brush against his leg. "Okay, this is it," he thought, lunging with his spear yet again. Success! He felt the spear connect, and with a triumphant yell, he pulled in a rather hefty fish. "I did it! I actually did it!" he exclaimed, holding the fish up like a trophy, water dripping from his fingertips. But as he turned to head back to shore, he didn't notice a curious sea turtle swimming directly towards him. Before he knew it, he tripped over the turtle, landing face first into the sand once again. "Not again!" he groaned, face planted in the grains, while the fish flopped beside him, as if mocking his clumsiness. The sea turtle, however, seemed unfazed. It slowly made its way past Bob, who was now struggling to get up while laughing at the ridiculousness of his situation. "Well, at least I can add turtle tumbler to my resume," he chuckled, shaking the sand out of his hair. With the fish in hand and a newfound determination, Bob returned to his makeshift camp and prepared to cook his catch. He had learned a few tricks over the months, experimenting with different methods of cooking over an open fire. "Tonight, we dine like kings," he declared, slapping the fish onto a flat rock and seasoning it with whatever herbs he could find. As the sun set and the fire crackled, Bob savored the fruits of his labor. He sat on the sand, enjoying his hard-earned meal, while Bandit took a seat beside him, eyeing the fish with keen interest. "You'll get your share, buddy. Just let me enjoy the moment," Bob said, taking a satisfying bite. After the meal, Bob reclined back, looking up at the stars that twinkled above. He had come to appreciate these quiet moments of solitude where he could reflect on his journey. Sure, being stranded on an island was harsh, and he had faced plenty of ridiculous challenges, but it had also been the source of incredible growth and laughter. Just then, Bandit crawled over and plopped down onto Bob's lap, snuggling in like a furry pillow. "You know, I wouldn't trade this for anything," Bob mused, scratching behind Bandit's ears. "Even if I am a mud-covered, banana-fighting, turtle-tripping islander." As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Bob drifted off to sleep, dreaming of new adventures and the wild unpredictability of life on the island. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the one he had made for himself, filled with laughter, friendship, and the occasional wild boar encounter. And so, dear listeners, as we continue to follow Bob's journey on this strange, beautiful island, remember that life may throw us into chaotic situations, but sometimes the greatest stories come from the most absurd adventures. Embrace the wildness, find joy in the little moments, and never forget to laugh at yourself along the way. Until next time, keep your hearts light and your spirits high, for every day is a new opportunity for hilarity in the grand tapestry of life. As dawn broke over the island, Bob awoke to the melodic sound of waves crashing against the shore and the unmistakable aroma of burnt fish wafting through the air. "Well, that's a new one. Cooking by extinction," he joked, sitting up and surveying the remnants of last night's dinner. The fire had burned low, and the fish he had caught, a glorious specimen, had turned into a charred relic of his culinary ambitions. "Maybe I should stick to coconuts," he sighed, picking at the ashes like a disappointed chef. Nevertheless, Bob was determined not to let a little charred fish ruin his day. He stood up, stretched his limbs, and looked around at the beauty of the island. "Today is a new day," he declared, feeling the warm sun on his face. He decided it was time to tackle a new project, building a proper shelter. The palm frond tent had served him well, but it was clearly a temporary solution, and if he intended to spend any more time on this island, he needed something sturdier. preferably something that would shield him from the rain and the occasional curious boar. With renewed vigor, Bob gathered materials: branches, palm fronds, and anything else that seemed useful. "If I'm going to build a palace, I might as well do it right," he proclaimed, channeling his inner architect. He envisioned a grand structure, complete with a thatched roof, a cozy sleeping area, and perhaps even a designated bandit's corner for his little monkey companion. As he worked, Bob found himself talking to Bandit, who had taken to lounging on a nearby branch, munching on a coconut. "You know, Bandit, if we ever get rescued, I'm adding Master Builder to my resume," he joked. Bandit responded with a series of enthusiastic chattering, which Bob interpreted as approval. "Exactly. We're going to be the envy of the island." Bob's construction plans quickly devolved into a chaotic mess. He attempted to balance a large branch on a stack of smaller ones, only to have the entire structure collapse, sending him tumbling backward into a pile of leaves. "Well, that's one way to break ground," he laughed, brushing himself off and trying to regain his composure. After several hours of trial and error, Bob finally managed to erect a shelter that resembled a cross between a rustic cabin and a very confused igloo. "Not bad for a guy who used to struggle with IKEA furniture," he chuckled, admiring his handiwork. The roof was slightly askew, and the walls had gaps where the wind could definitely sneak through, but it was a palace compared to his previous abode. Feeling accomplished, Bob decided it was time for a celebratory feast. He headed back to the shoreline with visions of a seafood banquet dancing in his head. "Today, we feast like kings," he shouted, only to realize he was completely alone. "All right, fine, I'll feast like a king, and Bandit can be my royal jester." As he prepared for his fishing expedition, Bob noticed the tide was unusually low. "This is my moment," he exclaimed, grabbing his spear and sprinting toward the water. He waded in, scanning the shallow waters for any signs of movement. "Fish, prepare to meet your doom." What he didn't anticipate was the sudden appearance of a group of mischievous crabs scuttling around like little armored tanks. "What is this? Crab warfare?" Bob laughed, trying to dodge their quick movements. He took a step forward and accidentally squished one underfoot. "Oops, sorry, little soldier," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't mean to declare war on your territory." As Bob continued his fishing efforts, he managed to catch a few small fish, but they were hardly enough to call it a feast. "Hey, a catch is a catch," he told himself, feeling proud of his haul, even if it was more of a snack than a banquet. He returned to his shelter, ready to cook up a storm. After setting up the fire, Bob began to prepare his catch. "Cooking is an art," he declared, channeling his inner chef. "And today we're going for fish a la mud." He chuckled as he realized he had accidentally dropped a few pieces of fish into the mud before placing them over the fire. But he decided that a little dirt never hurt anyone. Besides, he was living on an island. Who was going to judge him? Just as he was about to dig in, Bandit appeared, swinging down from a branch with the grace of an acrobat. He landed near Bob, eyeing the fish with keen interest. "Ah, the royal jester arrives. Would you care for a bite?" Bob asked, offering a piece of the well-cooked fish. Bandit sniffed it curiously before shaking his head, as if to say, "I have standards." "Fine, be that way," Bob laughed, taking a bite himself. To his surprise, it was delicious, even with a hint of mud. "Yes, I'm a culinary genius," he declared, savoring the moment. But the celebration was short-lived as he felt a sudden jolt of pain in his foot. "What now?" he grumbled, looking down to see a rogue crab had decided to latch onto his toe. "All right, you little demon," Bob exclaimed, hopping around on one foot, trying to dislodge the unwelcome guest. "You're ruining my feast." After a few chaotic moments, he managed to shake the crab loose, sending it flying into the sand. "That's it! Today's definitely not crab day." With the distraction past, Bob returned to his feast, enjoying his meal in peace, until he spotted a curious figure lurking in the bushes nearby. "Uh-oh," he muttered, squinting to get a better look. "What now? Is it the boar? Or have I been marked for crab diplomacy?" To his relief, it was just a curious goat, peering at him with wide eyes. "A goat? Really? I'm in a sitcom," Bob laughed, waving at the creature. "Welcome to my island. You're just in time for dinner." The goat seemed unfazed and wandered closer, sniffing at the remnants of Bob's meal. Bob couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. I've got a goat now. What's next? A parrot that tells jokes? He mused. Bandit, ever the opportunist, approached the goat cautiously, sizing up the competition. Be careful, Bandit. You know this is my dinner guest. In a moment of sheer inspiration, Bob decided to name the goat Billy. Come on, Billy. Join the party. Just don't expect a 5-star meal, he joked as the goat continued to munch on the bits of fish left on the ground. At this rate, I should open an animal restaurant. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Bob sat back, feeling content surrounded by his new companions. You know, this isn't half bad. Just me, Bandit, and Billy the goat. Who needs civilization? But as night fell, the harsh realities of island life began to creep in. Bob realized he had to secure his shelter better. The last thing he wanted was a surprise visit from a wild boar in the middle of the night. All right, time to reinforce the palace, he declared, grabbing more palm fronds and sticks. The night was filled with the sounds of rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets. Bob worked tirelessly, determined to make his shelter as sturdy as possible. You see this, Bandit? This is how we make a fortress, he exclaimed, feeling like a medieval king defending his castle. But just as he was about to finish, he heard a loud crash from the nearby bushes. What now? He whispered, heart racing. He peered into the darkness, only to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him. Oh no, this can't be good, he muttered, taking a few steps back. Suddenly, a wild boar burst through the underbrush, snorting and charging directly toward him. Not again, Bob yelled, scrambling for cover. He ducked behind a tree, heart pounding as he watched the boar plow through his hard work, sending palm fronds flying everywhere. This is not how I envisioned my fortress. As the boar continued its rampage, Bob decided it was time to take action. Okay, Bob, think. You can't let a wild boar destroy your dreams. He grabbed a stick and prepared to defend his territory. Hey, over here, you big hairy menace, he shouted, waving the stick like a sword. To his surprise, the boar paused, turning to face him. That's right, I'm talking to you, Bob continued, feeling both brave and ridiculous. You want a piece of me? You'll have to get through my stick first, the boar snorted, clearly unimpressed. But as Bob waved the stick, it seemed to lose interest and wandered off, leaving Bob standing there, panting. I can't believe I just had a standoff with a boar, he laughed, shaking his head. And I thought my biggest challenge today was cooking fish. With the crisis averted, Bob returned to his shelter, now in shambles. Well, that was fun while it lasted, he sighed, but instead of feeling defeated, he found himself chuckling at the absurdity of it all. Who knew being stranded on an island could be such an adventure? As he settled down for the night, Bob felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. Sure, life was harsh, filled with wild animals and strange encounters, but it was also filled with laughter, unexpected friendships, and moments that made him feel alive. He lay back under the stars, Bandit curled up beside him, and Billy munching on the remnants of his dinner nearby. Good night, my wild companions, he murmured, closing his eyes. Here's to another day of ridiculous adventures tomorrow. And so, as the waves crashed gently against the shore and the stars twinkled overhead, Bob drifted off to sleep, dreaming of even more bizarre escapades on his little island in the vast Pacific. Life may have thrown him into chaos, but he had learned to embrace it, finding joy in the wildness that surrounded him. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the greatest treasure of all. As the first rays of sunlight painted the horizon a brilliant gold, Bob awoke to the sound of waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. He stretched, letting out a long yawn, while simultaneously trying to shake off the remnants of sleep that clung to him like a stubborn mosquito. Good morning, island life, he boomed, though there was no one to hear him except for Bandit, who was busy grooming himself like a furry little diva. Bob sat up, surveying his surroundings. His makeshift shelter had survived the night, albeit with a few new gaps that had been created by the boar's enthusiasm. Ah, well, if I wanted a view, I suppose I got one, he chuckled, poking his head out of the structure to catch a glimpse of the ocean sparkling in the sunlight. Today, Bob had a plan. He was going to catch a big fish, one that would guarantee him a feast worthy of a king. Today's the day, Bandit. We're going to have a seafood extravaganza, he declared, determination in his voice. He envisioned a feast complete with grilled fish, coconut salad, and maybe even a side of that mystery berry sauce he had concocted a few weeks back. After a quick breakfast of coconut water and a half-eaten banana, Bob gathered his fishing spear and set off toward the water, Bandit scampering alongside him, chattering excitedly. "What's on your mind, little buddy?" Bob asked, trying to decipher the monkey's enthusiastic gibberish. More coconuts? Or perhaps a new fashion statement? The pair reached the shore, and Bob took a deep breath, inhaling the salty air. "All right, let's do this," he said, wading into the water. He had learned a thing or two about fishing during his time on the island, mostly through trial and error, and he was ready to put his skills to the test. He crouched low, scanning the water for any signs of movement. "Fish of the Pacific, prepare to meet your doom," he whispered dramatically, channeling his inner fisherman. Just then, a school of fish darted past him, shimmering in the sunlight. "There we go," he exclaimed, launching his spear with all his might, and missed entirely. The spear flew through the water, splashing down in a spectacular failure. "Seriously? Did I just become the worst fisherman in history?" he groaned, shaking his head. "Maybe I should just stick to coconut smoothies." But Bob was nothing if not persistent. He adjusted his stance and focused again, determined not to let his ego take another hit. He steadied his breath, waiting patiently for another opportunity. After what felt like an eternity, a particularly plump fish swam into view. "This is it," Bob thought, adrenaline pumping through him. He threw the spear with precision this time, and this time he connected. The fish flopped wildly as Bob pulled it from the water, an enormous grin spreading across his face. "Victory!" he shouted, holding the fish high above his head like a trophy. "I am the king of the island." Just as he turned to head back, he heard a rustling in the bushes. "Oh no, not again!" Bob muttered, eyeing the source of the noise. To his dismay, out trotted the wild boar from the other day, snorting as it approached him with an air of confidence. "Listen, buddy," Bob said, holding the fish protectively in front of him. "You had your chance at the last feast. This one's mine." The boar paused, clearly unimpressed by Bob's bravado, and continued to advance. In a moment of sheer panic, Bob waved the fish in front of him like a weapon. "Stay back. I have a very pointy spear, and I'm not afraid to use it." The boar snorted again, looking baffled by the display. Bob took a step back and decided to employ a different tactic. "All right, how about a trade? You like coconuts, right?" With that, Bob quickly turned and dashed toward a nearby palm tree, grabbing a few coconuts and tossing them toward the boar. "Here, enjoy these instead," he yelled, hoping the distraction would work. The boar, intrigued by the flying coconuts, diverted its attention and began to investigate the offerings. Bob took the opportunity to make a hasty retreat, clutching his prize fish tightly. "I can't believe I just negotiated with a wild boar," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "What's next? A crab barter system?" Once back at his shelter, Bob set down the fish and began to prepare it for cooking. He lit a fire, excited to finally enjoy a proper meal. As the fish sizzled over the flames, the delicious aroma filled the air, and he couldn't help but feel proud of his catch. "Not bad for a guy who was once terrified of the ocean," he chuckled, poking at the fish with a stick to ensure it cooked evenly. Just then, Bandit swooped in, eyeing the cooking fish with great interest. All right. You can have a bite, but just one," Bob laughed, cutting a small piece and tossing it to his furry friend. Bandit caught it midair and promptly scampered up a nearby tree, chattering with delight. "Enjoy it while it lasts, my little monkey chef," Bob called up to him, feeling a surge of happiness as he watched Bandit happily munching on the fish. After a while, the fish was ready, perfectly cooked and smelling divine. Bob plated it up, if he could call it a plate when it was really just a flat rock, and sat down to enjoy his feast. He took a moment to appreciate the meal before him, feeling grateful for the bounty of the ocean. "Here's to the simple life," he toasted, raising an imaginary glass to the skies. As he dug into the fish, savoring every bite, he felt a sense of contentment wash over him. "This is living," he exclaimed, relishing the taste of his hard work. But just as he was about to take another bite, he heard a commotion nearby. He glanced over, and to his horror, he saw a group of monkeys swinging through the trees, headed straight for his dinner. No, not my fish," he shouted, scrambling to shield his meal. The monkeys landed with a flurry of chatter, eyeing Bob and the fish like a pack of hungry wolves. "Hey, you can't just swoop in and take my food," Bob protested, waving his arms wildly. "This is a one-man operation here." But the monkeys were undeterred, their little faces alight with mischief as they began to inch closer. Bandit, realizing his friends were encroaching on his territory, jumped down from his perch and joined Bob, chattering frantically at the intruders. "This is going to be a showdown, isn't it?" Bob sighed, preparing for a battle of wits with the furry bandits. In a moment of inspiration, he quickly took a piece of fish and tossed it in the opposite direction. "Look! Over there!" he shouted. The monkeys, distracted, immediately turned and raced after the piece of fish, leaving Bob and Bandit to reclaim their meal. "I can't believe I just staged a food diversion," Bob laughed, shaking his head incredulously. With his fish safe once again, Bob took a deep breath and sat back down to enjoy his meal. "Victory tastes sweet, doesn't it, Bandit?" he said, grinning as he took another bite. But just as he settled back into his moment of triumph, he heard the unmistakable sound of something crashing through the underbrush. "What now?" he groaned, rolling his eyes in exasperation. Was it the boar again, or perhaps a rogue goat? He turned to see an unexpected sight, a large sea turtle making its way toward him, moving slowly but determinedly. "Oh, for crying out loud! Even the turtles want in on the action?" Bob exclaimed, watching as the turtle plodded along, completely unfazed by his presence. It stopped a few feet away, staring at him for a moment, before slowly turning its head toward the fish. "Seriously? You too?" Bob laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. "What is this? A party for all the island critters?" The turtle, seemingly unimpressed by Bob's commentary, continued to inch closer, eyeing the fish with what could only be described as a gluttonous gaze. "All right, I get it. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet," Bob exclaimed, throwing his hands up in defeat. "Fine. You can have the scraps, but that's it." With that, he tossed a few small pieces of fish toward the turtle, who immediately lunged for them, snapping them up with surprising speed. "I can't believe I'm feeding a turtle now," Bob chuckled, watching as the creature devoured the fish like it hadn't eaten in weeks. Who knew this would turn into a culinary hotspot? As the turtle feasted, Bandit climbed back up to his tree perch, watching with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "You're just going to let it happen, aren't you?" Bob said, shaking his head. "You're a terrible sidekick, you know that?" But as Bob continued to watch the turtle, he felt a sense of camaraderie. Here he was, stranded on an island, sharing his hard-earned meal with a motley crew of wild animals. "You know what, Bandit? This isn't so bad. I mean, who else gets to have dinner with a turtle and a monkey?" As the day wore on, Bob settled down by the fire, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the island. He reflected on the absurdity of the day. The boar, the monkeys, the turtle, and couldn't help but laugh. "This is my life now, huh? An island sitcom with a cast of furry characters." Just then, he spotted movement on the horizon. "Wait, what's that?" He squinted, trying to make out the shape in the distance. As it drew closer, his heart raced with excitement. "A ship! An actual ship! Hey, over here!" Bob yelled, waving his arms wildly. "Help! I'm here!" He felt a rush of hope, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Bandit and the turtle looked on, confused by Bob's sudden frenzy. But just as quickly as the hope surged, it was dashed. The ship sailed past, oblivious to Bob's existence. "No, come back!" he shouted, feeling the weight of disappointment settle over him like a heavy blanket. As the vessel disappeared into the horizon, Bob slumped back down to the ground, staring at the retreating ship. "Well, that was anticlimactic," he muttered, feeling the sting of reality hit him hard. "Just when I thought I was getting out of here." He looked around at his surroundings, his shelter, Bandit, and even the sea turtle still munching on fish scraps, and let out a deep sigh. "All right, island life, you win this round," he said, forcing a smile. "But mark my words, I'm not giving up that easily." As darkness fell and the stars twinkled overhead, Bob settled down for the night, the warmth of the fire flickering beside him. He knew he still had a long way to go, but he also knew he had the resilience to face whatever came his way. With Bandit curled up beside him and the turtle nodding off in the sand, Bob closed his eyes, ready for whatever wild adventures awaited him the next day. Life on the island was harsh, unpredictable, and often downright ridiculous. but it was also filled with laughter, friendship, and the promise of new beginnings. And so, dear listeners, as we continue to journey alongside Bob in his adventures, remember to embrace the chaos of life. Sometimes the wildest experiences yield the greatest stories. Whether it's a boar in your way or a turtle stealing your dinner, there's always humor to be found in the unexpected. Until next time, keep your spirits high and your laughter loud, for every day is a new opportunity for adventure on this grand, unpredictable stage we call life. As dawn broke over the island, Bob awoke to the sound of the waves crashing rhythmically against the shore, a sound that had become both comforting and all too familiar. He stretched his arms wide, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. "Another day in paradise," he declared, forcing himself out of his makeshift bed of palm fronds and sand. "Let's see what today has in store." Bob's first order of business was breakfast, or, as he had come to call it, the daily coconut struggle. He ventured into the clearing where the coconut palms stood tall, ready for battle. "All right, coconuts, prepare to meet your demise," he announced, picking up a rock he had designated as his trusty coconut cracking tool. After several enthusiastic swings that resulted in nothing more than a sore arm and a few bemused monkeys watching from the trees, Bob finally managed to crack one open. "Victory!" he exclaimed, triumphantly holding the coconut aloft. But his celebration was short-lived. As he took a sip, he noticed something odd floating inside. "Is that a bug?" he grimaced, spitting out the coconut water like it had betrayed him. "All right, fine. You win this round, coconut," he muttered, tossing it aside in frustration. He turned to see Bandit, the ever-enthusiastic monkey, perched on a branch, chattering away as if laughing at Bob's misfortune. Yeah, laugh it up, furball." Bob shot back, shaking his head with a smile. "You're not the one living on a diet of questionable coconuts and mystery berries." With breakfast a bust, Bob decided it was time to embark on a new adventure, finding a better source of food. The ocean had proven to be a fickle friend, and he needed to expand his culinary horizons beyond fish and coconuts. "Today we're going gourmet," he announced, strutting confidently toward the shoreline, Bandit scampering behind him. He had heard rumors, well, more like whispers from the wind, about a hidden grove on the other side of the island, filled with exotic fruits. "If I can find this grove, I'll be a culinary genius," he said, puffing out his chest dramatically. "I'll host the finest dining experience the animal kingdom has ever seen." As he made his way through the thick foliage, Bob felt the familiar thrill of exploration. "Who needs a GPS when you have instinct?" he chuckled, though deep down he was aware that his sense of direction had been questionable at best. He pushed through the underbrush, determined to find this mythical grove of deliciousness. After what seemed like an eternity of hiking, dodging branches, and nearly tripping over roots, Bob finally stumbled upon a radiant clearing. "Jackpot!" he shouted, eyes wide as he took in the sight before him. The trees were laden with colorful fruits, bright oranges, plump mangoes, and even a few odd-shaped fruits that Bob couldn't quite identify. "I've hit the mother lode." Bob eagerly approached one of the trees, reaching up to pluck a vibrant mango. "This is it. I'm about to become the Gordon Ramsay of the animal kingdom," he declared, holding the mango like a trophy. He took a bite, and the sweetness exploded in his mouth. "Oh yeah, this is what I'm talking about," he exclaimed, savoring the juicy fruit as he stood among the trees. Just then, he heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. "What now?" he muttered, turning to see a wild boar emerging from the underbrush, snorting loudly as it approached. "Oh, come on! I just found my food paradise!" "You're not invited." The boar, however, seemed undeterred by Bob's protests. It ambled closer, drawn in by the sweet aroma of the mangoes. "No, you'll ruin everything," Bob shouted, brandishing the half-eaten mango like it was a weapon. "I'm not sharing this with you." In a moment of desperation, Bob dropped the mango and backed away, hoping to divert the boar's attention. "Look, over there! Coconuts! It's a buffet!" he yelled, pointing in the opposite direction. To his relief, the boar paused, its snout twitching as it considered the offer. As the boar lumbered off in search of coconuts, Bob breathed a sigh of relief. "That was way too close for comfort," he said, shaking his head. "I can't believe I'm negotiating with wild animals over fruit." Feeling triumphant, Bob returned to the grove and gathered a few more mangoes, stuffing them into his makeshift satchel. This is going to be the best dinner ever, he exclaimed, practically skipping back through the jungle with his bounty. Once back at his shelter, Bob set to work, preparing a feast fit for a king, or at least a very hungry island dweller. He sliced up the mangoes and combined them with some of the fish he had caught earlier. Mango salsa, island style, he declared, mixing the ingredients with wild abandon. This is going to be legendary. As he cooked, Bandit watched intently from his perch, chattering excitedly at the delicious scents wafting through the air. You'll get your share, don't worry, Bob promised. But this is my moment to shine. After a few minutes, Bob plated up his culinary masterpiece and sat down to enjoy the feast. Here's to the wildlife, he toasted, raising an imaginary glass as he dug into his creation. The combination of sweet mango and savory fish was a hit, and Bob couldn't help but revel in his success. This is gourmet dining, island style, he laughed, stuffing his face. But as he savored each bite, he noticed a rustling in the bushes nearby. Oh no, not again, he groaned, looking up to see a small herd of monkeys swinging down from the trees, eyes wide with curiosity and mischief. You've got to be kidding me. The monkeys landed around him, chattering excitedly as they eyed Bob's meal. No, this is my food, he shouted, trying to shoo them away. But the monkeys were undeterred, inching closer as they sniffed the air. In a moment of panic, Bob quickly grabbed a handful of mango salsa and tossed it to the side. Look, over there, a fruit buffet just for you, he shouted, hoping to distract them. The monkeys immediately darted after the salsa, leaving Bob to enjoy his meal in peace, at least for the moment. As he resumed eating, he couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. I'm becoming a one-man dinner show for a bunch of monkeys, he chuckled. Who would have thought? After finishing his meal, Bob leaned back, feeling satisfied and content. Life on this island may be harsh, but at least it's never boring, he mused, looking around at the lively scene. Bandit returned to his perch, clearly pleased with the distraction, while the monkeys continued to frolic around, chasing each other playfully. But just as Bob was about to relax, he heard a loud crash from the underbrush. What now? He muttered, glancing over to see the wild boar re-emerging, this time with a determined look on its face. Oh no, not you again! The boar charged toward him, clearly unsatisfied with the coconut buffet it had found earlier. I've had enough of your antics, Bob shouted, scrambling back to his feet. He grabbed a stick and prepared to defend his territory once more. Stay back, or I'll unleash my culinary wrath. The boar snorted and barreled forward, and Bob realized he needed to think fast. Okay, Bob, what's your escape plan? He thought. In a moment of inspiration, he grabbed a nearby mango and tossed it toward the boar. Here, enjoy this instead. The boar skidded to a halt, intrigued by the flying fruit. It sniffed the mango before chomping down on it, clearly delighted by the unexpected treat. That's right. You like mangoes, don't you? Just leave me and my dinner alone, Bob exclaimed, watching as the boar happily munched away. With the boar distracted, Bob took the opportunity to retreat back to his shelter. This is getting ridiculous, he muttered, shaking his head. I never thought I'd have to defend my dinner from a wild boar and a pack of monkeys. As night began to fall, Bob settled in with Bandit and the now contented boar, who had wandered over to inspect Bob's shelter. Great, now I have a boar as a roommate, he joked. Just what I needed. The evening was filled with the sounds of the jungle, crickets chirping, waves crashing, and the occasional monkey call. Bob felt a sense of peace wash over him, despite the chaos of the day. You know, this isn't so bad, he said, glancing over at Bandit, who was grooming himself contentedly. We've got a full belly, good company, and the great outdoors. As he lay back on the sand, staring up at the stars, Bob couldn't help but feel grateful for the wild adventure that had become his life. Sure, it was harsh and unpredictable, but it was also filled with laughter, unexpected friendships, and moments that made him feel alive. All right, island life, he murmured, closing his eyes. Bring on tomorrow. I'm ready for whatever absurdity you have in store. And so, as the night deepened and the stars twinkled overhead, Bob drifted off to sleep, dreaming of wild boars, mischievous monkeys, and all the adventures that awaited him on his little slice of paradise in the Pacific. Life may have thrown him into chaos, but he had learned to embrace it, finding joy in the wildness that surrounded him. As the waves lapped gently against the shore, Bob knew that each day was a new opportunity for laughter, resilience, and the kind of absurdity that only island life could provide. And with that thought, he surrendered to sleep, ready for whatever awaited him in the morning. As dawn broke over the island, Bob was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a raucous monkey chorus. Bandit, perched on a branch above, was leading the morning serenade, clearly enjoying his newfound role as the island's very own alarm clock. All right, I'm up. I get it, Bob groaned, rubbing sleep from his eyes and stretching his sore limbs. Just because I'm living off the grid doesn't mean I need to wake up with the sun. He reluctantly dragged himself out of his makeshift bed, a pile of palm fronds and sand, and blinked at the bright morning light. What's on the agenda today? He wondered aloud. More culinary masterpieces? A daring exploration of the island? Or perhaps I should finally figure out how to make a proper bathroom. Bob decided to take a stroll along the shoreline, hoping to gather his thoughts and maybe find some inspiration for breakfast. The sand felt warm beneath his feet, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore was strangely therapeutic. Nothing like a little morning meditation, he mused, taking a deep breath of salty air. As he walked, he spotted a few interesting shells scattered along the beach. These could make great decorations for my shelter, he thought, picking them up and tossing them into his satchel. Maybe I can turn my humble abode into the island's first art gallery. But his artistic ambitions were cut short by a sudden commotion nearby. Bob turned to see a group of crabs scuttling frantically, seemingly in a panic. "What's going on, little guys?" he asked, squatting down to get a closer look. "Is there a crab emergency?" Just then, a shadow passed overhead, and Bob looked up to see a seagull swooping down, eyeing the crabs like they were a fast food buffet. "Oh no, not on my watch," he shouted, leaping to his feet. With a burst of adrenaline, he waved his arms and shouted, "Get out of here, you feathered fiend!" The seagull, startled by the sudden human intervention, screeched and veered away, leaving the crabs to scuttle back to safety. Bob felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. "There we go. Just call me the protector of the island," he declared, striking a heroic pose. "Defender of the crustaceans, savior of the sand." Feeling pleased with himself, Bob resumed his stroll, his mind racing with ideas for the day ahead. "I should probably check in on my culinary skills," he mused, heading back toward his shelter. "Maybe I'll attempt something even more ambitious today, like a fruit salad." Once back at his camp, he gathered the mangoes and some of the mystery berries he had collected earlier. "Today is a day for creativity," he announced, channeling his inner chef. He began chopping and mixing, trying to create something that resembled a tropical fruit salad. "This will be my culinary masterpiece," he said, envisioning a Michelin star for his performance. As the fruits blended together, Bob suddenly felt a tickle on his leg. He glanced down to find Bandit sniffing curiously at the salad. "Hey, you can't just sneak in and steal my hard work." Bob laughed, swatting playfully at the monkey. Bandit chattered back, clearly unimpressed. "Fine. You want a taste? Here." Bob tossed a small piece of mango toward Bandit, who caught it midair, eyes gleaming with delight. "See? Sharing is caring," Bob said, grinning as he watched Bandit savor the treat. But just as Bob was about to take a bite of his own creation, he heard an ominous rustling from the bushes nearby. "Oh no, not again!" he groaned, recognizing the sound of trouble. The wild boar appeared once more, this time with a few friends in tow. "Great, a boar party!" Bob exclaimed, eyeing the group warily. "I really didn't plan for this." The boar and its companions ambled closer, their noses twitching as they caught a whiff of the fruit salad. "No, you can't have my food!" Bob shouted, attempting to shield his masterpiece with his body. In a moment of desperation, he grabbed a nearby coconut and hurled it at the boars. "Here, enjoy this instead." The coconut landed with a thud, catching the attention of the wild hogs, who immediately diverted their attention to the new offering. "Success!" Bob cheered, watching as they began to tussle over the coconut, leaving him free to enjoy his fruit salad. Just as he settled back down, ready to take a triumphant bite, he heard a loud thud from behind him. Bob turned to see the largest boar of the bunch, now very interested in his fruit salad and completely undeterred by the coconut. "Oh no, you don't!" he shouted, scrambling to protect his food. The boar charged forward, and Bob, feeling like a cartoon character, leaped up and waved his arms. Back away, you furry menace! This is not a buffet. In a moment of sheer panic, Bob grabbed his spear, which had been resting nearby, and waved it in front of him. I will defend my culinary honor, he shouted, feeling ridiculous but entirely committed to the role of the fierce protector of his meal. To his surprise, the boar halted, confused by Bob's antics. It snorted, eyeing Bob's fruit salad with a mix of curiosity and hunger. You think you can intimidate me with a stare down? Bob challenged, feeling a surge of bravado. But just then, Bandit jumped down from his perch, grabbed a piece of fruit from the salad, and darted up a nearby tree. Oh no, you traitor! Bob gasped, half laughing, half indignant. You're supposed to be my sidekick, not my food thief. The boar, sensing opportunity, lunged forward, distracted by Bandit's antics. Bob seized the moment and tossed a handful of fruit salad to the side. Look, over there, a feast fit for a king, he shouted, hoping to redirect the boar's attention. The boar skidded to a halt, turning its snout toward the flying fruit. That's right, go for the salad, just leave me alone, Bob exclaimed, feeling like he was in a bizarre food circus. As the boar turned to investigate the fruit salad, Bob made a hasty retreat, retreating to the safety of his shelter. I can't believe I just defended my lunch from a boar and a monkey, he laughed to himself, shaking his head. Once inside, he sighed, trying to calm his racing heart. All right, Bob, breathe. You survived another culinary crisis, he said, collapsing onto his makeshift bed. But just as he did, he heard a soft scratch at the entrance of his shelter. What now? He muttered, looking toward the entrance. He peeked out to find a rather curious goat staring back at him, munching on a piece of grass. Oh, great! A goat now? Am I running a zoo? The goat bleated softly, as if to say, I'm here for the show. Bob burst out laughing. Welcome to my humble abode. We serve fruit salad, coconut, and the occasional wild boar. For a moment, Bob considered the absurdity of his situation. He was living alone on a deserted island, surrounded by a cast of wild animals vying for his attention and his food. This is the strangest reality show ever, he chuckled, shaking his head. And I'm the star. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Bob decided to make the most of the evening. All right, time to channel my inner entertainer, he declared, grabbing a few sticks and arranging them into a makeshift stage. Welcome to the Bob Show, featuring my fabulous animal friends. He began to perform, telling exaggerated stories of his encounters with the wild boar, the monkeys, and even the occasional sea turtle. And then, in a daring act of bravery, I saved the crabs from certain doom, he exclaimed, mimicking a heroic pose. Bandit watched from a branch, chattering enthusiastically, while the goat stood nearby, seemingly captivated by Bob's antics. Look at this! I have an audience! Bob laughed, feeling a surge of joy. This is what island life is all about. As he continued to regale his audience with tales of survival, Bob felt a deep sense of connection to the wild creatures around him. They were no longer just animals, they were companions, spectators in his ongoing adventure. You know, I wouldn't trade this for anything, he said, glancing at Bandit and the goat. Even if it means sharing my food with a bunch of hungry critters. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Bob settled down for the night, content with the chaos and laughter that had filled his day. He realized that life on the island was harsh, with its fair share of challenges, but it was also an adventure filled with unexpected joys and friendships. Here's to another day of absurdity, he said, closing his eyes and drifting off to sleep, dreaming of wild boars, mischievous monkeys, and the delightful unpredictability of life on his little island in the Pacific. And so, as the waves lapped gently against the shore, Bob embraced the wildness of his existence, ready for whatever absurdity awaited him in the days to come. Life may have thrown him into chaos, but he had learned to find humor in it all, one coconut, one boar, and one monkey at a time. As the sun broke over the horizon, Bob awoke to the sound of waves crashing and the gentle rustling of leaves. He blinked sleepily, stretching his arms and groaning as he sat up. Good morning, glorious island of chaos, he shouted, still half in a dream. Bandit, his furry sidekick, was already perched on a branch above, munching on what appeared to be a particularly ripe coconut. What are you having for breakfast, Bandit? Coconut again? You've got to diversify your diet, my friend. Bob rubbed his eyes and glanced around his makeshift shelter, which had survived another night without being completely torn apart by a boar, a goat, or a rogue wave. Not bad, Bob. Not bad, he said to himself, feeling a sense of pride mixed with disbelief at how he had adapted to island life. Just another day in paradise. After a quick breakfast of some leftover fruit salad and a half-hearted attempt at securing a coconut, Bob decided it was time to embark on a new adventure. Today I shall explore the mysterious jungle, he proclaimed dramatically, as if announcing the start of an epic quest. Who knows what treasures await? With Bandit scampering alongside him, Bob ventured into the dense underbrush, the sunlight filtering through the leaves like a spotlight on his one-man show. This is like Survivor meets the Jungle Book, he muttered, ducking under low branches and sidestepping roots. Except I'm the only contestant, and my tribe consists of monkeys and the occasional confused goat. As he pushed deeper into the jungle, Bob started to notice how beautiful and vibrant everything was. Flowers bloomed in all colors, and strange, exotic fruits hung from the trees. "Look at this place," he exclaimed, holding up a bizarre-looking fruit that resembled a bright purple pineapple. "What do you think, Bandit? Is this a delicacy or a one-way ticket to stomach trouble?" Bandit tilted his head, as if contemplating the question. "All right, I'll take that as a no," Bob laughed, tossing the fruit aside. "Sometimes it's better to stick with what you know, like mangoes and coconuts." After a while, Bob stumbled across a small stream, the water crystal clear and inviting. "Ah, fresh water! A miracle on this island," he shouted, kneeling down to take a sip. It was cool and refreshing, and he felt invigorated by it. "Maybe I should start a wellness retreat. Detox with Bob, coconuts, crabs, and chaos." Just as he was relishing the moment, he heard a rustling in the bushes behind him. "Not again," he groaned, glancing back to see the wild boar from yesterday peeking through the foliage. "What do you want now? Are you here to make my life even more chaotic?" The boar snorted, clearly unimpressed, and continued to forage for food nearby. Bob watched it for a moment, half expecting it to charge at him again. "You know, I almost respect your tenacity," he admitted, shaking his head. "But you're not getting my fruit salad this time." Feeling bold, Bob decided to confront the boar. "Listen, pal, I know we've had our differences," he began, trying to channel his inner animal whisperer. "But if you want to hang out, I can promise you a lot more coconuts than fruit salad." The boar looked up, as if considering Bob's offer. "That's right. I'm the coconut king now," he declared, gesturing toward the palm trees. "You can have as many as you want. Just don't charge at me like a freight train again." To his surprise, the boar seemed to understand, wandering over to the nearest coconut tree and snuffling around the base. "See? This is how we can coexist," Bob cheered, feeling like a true diplomat of the animal kingdom. "You take the coconuts, and I'll keep my fruit salad." But the moment of harmony was short-lived. As the boar began to dig at the roots of the tree, Bob noticed a sudden commotion nearby. A group of monkeys swung down from the branches, chattering loudly as they spotted the boar. "Uh-oh," Bob muttered, watching as the monkeys began to invade the boar's personal space. "Hey, no fighting! We're all friends here," Bob yelled, trying to mediate the situation. But the monkeys were undeterred, jumping around the boar and pulling at its ears, clearly trying to assert their dominance. "Seriously? Is this how you handle disputes?" The boar, feeling threatened, snorted angrily and lunged at the monkeys. "Whoa, whoa, this is not how we do things," Bob shouted, jumping between the two groups. "Can't we just have a peaceful coexistence?" In the chaos, Bandit took it upon himself to leap into action, darting to Bob's side. "That's right! Teamwork!" Bob encouraged, feeling a surge of camaraderie with his little monkey friend. Eventually, the monkeys retreated, realizing that the boar was not to be trifled with. Bob stood there, panting and trying to catch his breath. "Well, that was fun," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I never thought I'd be a referee in a wildlife wrestling match." As the dust settled, Bob turned back to the boar, who was now happily munching on a coconut. "See? Peaceful coexistence," he declared, feeling triumphant. "And no one had to be a casualty, even if it was just a fruit fight." With the excitement of the morning behind him, Bob decided it was time to head back to his shelter. The sun was high in the sky, and he was starting to feel the heat. "Let's check in on our humble abode," he said, leading the way back through the jungle. Once he returned, he found Bandit already climbing around the shelter, inspecting it for any signs of mischief. "What are you doing, little buddy? Making sure the walls are still standing?" Bob chuckled, feeling grateful that his makeshift home had withstood the chaos of yesterday and today. Bob took a moment to relax, flopping down on his makeshift bed and letting out a contented sigh. "Life on this island may be harsh, but it's also an adventure like no other," he said, gazing at the ceiling of palm fronds. "Who else can say they've negotiated with wild boars and refereed monkey wrestling? I'm basically a reality TV star." As the afternoon wore on, Bob decided it was time to get back to the culinary arts. "I've got to try my hand at something new," he mused, rummaging through his collection of fruits and ingredients. "How about a tropical smoothie? I can make it a signature drink on my wellness retreat." He began blending together the remaining mangoes, mystery berries, and even a few coconut shavings. "This is going to be revolutionary," he declared, pouring the concoction into a hollowed-out coconut for presentation. He lifted it triumphantly. "Tropical bliss, brought to you by Bob." Just as he was about to take a sip, he heard a loud crash outside. "Oh no, what now?" he groaned, setting the coconut down and rushing outside. To his horror, he found the wild boar once again, this time accompanied by 2 more boars, all of them snuffling around his shelter. "Hey, this is my home, not a boar buffet," Bob shouted, trying to shoo them away. The boars, however, were undeterred, nosing around curiously. "What is it with you guys? Can't you find your own food?" Bob exclaimed, exasperated. In a moment of desperation, he grabbed a handful of the tropical smoothie and tossed it toward the boars. "Here, enjoy this instead." One of the boars sniffed the smoothie, then promptly turned its head and snorted in disgust. "Oh, come on," Bob cried. "It's delicious, a refreshing blend of tropical flavors." But the boars didn't seem impressed, and Bob felt defeated. Just then, Bandit scampered over, grabbing a piece of fruit and boldly swinging down in front of the boars. "What are you doing, Bandit?" Bob asked, bewildered. But Bandit seemed to be trying to play peacemaker, showing the boars that there were plenty of fruits to enjoy. "Is this a new tactic? Distracting them with fruit?" Bob mused, watching as Bandit tossed a coconut in the air, causing one of the boars to become momentarily distracted. "Well, I suppose that works better than my diplomacy tactics," he chuckled, shaking his head. The boars eventually diverted their attention to the coconuts, and Bob took a breath of relief. "Finally, some peace," he shouted, turning back to his coconut smoothie. But just as he reached for it, he heard a loud crash from the other side of the shelter. "Seriously?" he yelled, throwing his hands up in frustration. "What now? Is this a wild boar convention? Do I need to put out a welcome mat?" He rushed around to find the goats, a few of them now grazing on his carefully arranged collection of fruit. "Hey! No! That's not for you!" Bob shouted, trying to chase them away. "You're not invited to my tropical retreat." In the chaos, Bandit took the opportunity to snatch the coconut smoothie from the ground, scurrying up a nearby tree. "No! Come back! That was my masterpiece," Bob exclaimed, watching in horror as Bandit took a sip, clearly enjoying it far too much. Bob stood there, arms crossed, watching as the goats continued to munch away at the fruits he had gathered. "Yep, just another day in paradise," he sighed, shaking his head. "I never thought I'd need to baby-proof my food from a gang of goats." He finally managed to scare the goats away, but by then it was clear that the day was not going as planned. "All right, Bob, let's regroup," he said to himself, trying to remain optimistic. "We'll just have to try again tomorrow. One less fruit salad, one more adventure." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with brilliant hues of orange and pink, Bob settled back down in his shelter, exhausted from the day's chaos. Bandit returned, looking quite pleased with himself, and Bob couldn't help but chuckle. "You little thief. I should have known you'd make out like a bandit. Literally." With the sounds of the jungle surrounding him, Bob reflected on the day's events. Life on the island was unpredictable and often chaotic, but it was also filled with laughter and moments of absurdity that kept him going. "Bring on tomorrow," he declared, lying back to gaze at the stars. "I'm ready for whatever wild adventure awaits." And so, as the waves crashed gently against the shore and the stars twinkled above, Bob drifted off to sleep, dreaming of boars, monkeys, and the delightful unpredictability of life on his little slice of paradise. Each day was a new opportunity for chaos, and he was determined to embrace it all, one coconut, one adventure, and one laugh at a time. As dawn broke over the island, Bob awoke to the sounds of the jungle, birds chirping, monkeys chattering, and the distant crash of waves against the shore. He rubbed his eyes and stretched, feeling both refreshed and a bit sore from yesterday's escapades. "Another day in paradise," he exclaimed, attempting to summon some enthusiasm, even though he could already feel the telltale ache in his muscles from wrestling with boars and goats. He swung his legs over the side of his makeshift bed and glanced around his shelter. It hadn't been completely demolished overnight, which he took as a small victory. "All right, Bob, let's see what culinary masterpieces we can concoct today," he declared, grabbing a few coconuts and hoping they wouldn't betray him like the last batch had. After a quick breakfast of coconut water, bug-free this time, and some mystery berries, he decided it was time for a new adventure. "Today, we're going to find that hidden grove I've heard whispers about," he announced, though the whispers mostly came from Bandit, who had a knack for making excited, chattering sounds whenever Bob mentioned food. "Yes, Bandit, I know it's a magical place full of exotic fruits and culinary potential." With a new sense of purpose, Bob gathered his supplies, a few makeshift tools, a water bottle filled with coconut water, and a bit of dried fish from yesterday's catch. "Let's do this," he said, pumping his fist in the air. Bandit, clearly in support of the plan, leaped onto Bob's shoulder, ready for the journey ahead. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, Bob couldn't help but marvel at the beauty that surrounded him. Vivid flowers bloomed in every direction, and the sounds of wildlife filled the air. "You know, this isn't half bad," he mused, occasionally swatting at mosquitoes that buzzed around his head like tiny, irritating helicopters. "Maybe I should start a travel blog, Stranded in Paradise, a guide to surviving on an island." But soon enough, the path became less clear. The lush undergrowth thickened, and Bob found himself dodging branches and tripping over roots. "Why is it that every adventure comes with a side of clumsiness?" he laughed, regaining his balance after stumbling into a bush. "I'm starting to think the island has a sense of humor." After navigating through the thick foliage, he finally spotted a clearing up ahead. Could this be it? He wondered aloud, excitement bubbling within him. As they approached, his heart raced. "It's like finding the holy grail of tropical fruit." The grove was indeed magnificent, filled with trees laden with colorful fruit, mangoes, bananas, and even a few strange-looking fruits that Bob couldn't identify. "Jackpot!" he shouted, causing Bandit to jump off his shoulder and scamper toward the nearest mango tree. "Feast your eyes on this, my furry friend. We're about to have a tropical buffet." Bob wasted no time in gathering as much fruit as he could carry, piling his arms high with the sweet treasures. "I'm going to be the island's most renowned chef," he proclaimed, feeling like a conquering hero. "I'll be famous for my exotic fruit salads and tropical smoothies." But just as he turned to head back, he heard an ominous snort from behind him. Bob froze, knowing exactly what that sound meant. "Oh no, not you again!" he groaned, turning slowly to face the wild boar, who seemed to have taken a particular interest in Bob's fruit haul. The boar stood there, eyeing the pile of fruit with an intensity that made Bob feel like he was standing between a hungry toddler and a cookie jar. "Listen, pal," Bob said, trying to reason with the beast. "I've just found this amazing grove, and if you'll give me a moment, I'll share some of it with you, after I've had my fill." The boar snorted again, clearly unimpressed with Bob's negotiation skills. "Great, this is going to end badly," he muttered, clutching his fruit pile tightly. "How do you negotiate with a hungry boar? Do I need a lawyer, or should I just throw a mango at it?" In a moment of desperation, Bob decided to try something different. "All right, let's make a deal," he shouted, tossing a ripe banana toward the boar. "You can have this banana if you promise to leave the rest of my fruits alone." To Bob's surprise, the boar caught the banana midair and began munching on it with glee. "Yes, I'm a genius," Bob cheered, feeling a surge of confidence. "I can negotiate with wildlife. Who knew I'd become the boar whisperer?" But just then, he heard more rustling from behind and turned to see a whole family of boars emerging from the underbrush, attracted by the commotion. Oh no, this is not good, he groaned, watching as they all started to converge on his fruit pile. I can't feed an entire family of boars. I'll be overrun. Bandit, we're out of here, Bob shouted, quickly turning to make his escape. He sprinted back through the grove, Bandit close on his heels, both of them dodging branches and leaping over roots. This is not how I envisioned my fruit adventure, he yelled, glancing back to see the boars charging after them, their snouts twitching in excitement. They burst out of the grove and into the jungle, Bob's heart racing as he pushed through the underbrush. Keep going, Bandit! We can't let them catch us, he urged, feeling the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Finally, they reached the shoreline, and Bob skidded to a halt, panting heavily. We made it! He exclaimed, turning to see the boars stop at the edge of the jungle, snorting in frustration, but unwilling to chase any further. Ha! Take that, you fruit thieves! With the boars safely behind them, Bob collapsed onto the sand, laughing uncontrollably. I can't believe I just outran a family of wild boars. I'm basically a superhero now. Bandit, still buzzing with energy, climbed onto Bob's shoulder, chattering excitedly as if to agree. Bob took a moment to catch his breath, realizing that perhaps the adventure had its ups and downs, but ultimately it was never dull. All right, let's regroup. We've still got some fruits to enjoy, he said, glancing at the remaining fruits he had managed to save from the boar onslaught. Feeling triumphant, Bob settled down on the beach and began to prepare a fruit salad, mixing together the mangoes, bananas, and whatever else he could salvage. This is going to be the best meal yet, he declared, slicing and dicing with the confidence of a seasoned chef. I should really consider opening a restaurant, Bob's Island Delights. As he mixed the ingredients, he felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. The sun was shining, the waves were crashing, and he had successfully evaded a herd of hungry boars. What more could a guy want? He mused, taking a big bite of the salad. Just then, he heard a loud squawk overhead. He looked up to see Chef Feathers, his resident parrot, swooping down to investigate. Ah, Chef Feathers, you've arrived just in time for the grand unveiling of my culinary masterpiece, Bob announced, holding up the bowl of fruit salad like a trophy. The parrot landed nearby, cocking its head as if to say, "What's all this, then?" Bob couldn't help but laugh. I know. It's not your usual fare, but it's tropical and delicious, he said, offering a piece of mango to the bird. Chef Feathers took a tentative bite, then squawked with delight. See? Gourmet, Bob cheered, feeling a sense of accomplishment. As the sun began to set, casting golden rays over the ocean, Bob savored the moment. This is living, he said, leaning back against the sand. Sure, it's chaotic, but it's also beautiful. I've got good food, a great view, and a monkey for a best friend. Just then, he heard a loud crash from the direction of his shelter. What now? He groaned, sitting up quickly. He glanced back to see the goats had returned, this time with even more friends in tow. Seriously? Is this a goat reunion? The goats began to graze around his shelter, clearly pleased with their surroundings. Bob threw his hands up in exasperation. You've got to be kidding me! I can't keep feeding this entire herd. What's next? A goat parade? But as the goats munched away, Bob couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. You know what? Fine. You can have the leftovers, he shouted, gesturing toward the remnants of the fruit salad. Just leave me the coconuts. With the goats distracted, Bob took a moment to enjoy the peace, despite the chaos. He leaned back against the sand, gazing at the sunset, feeling grateful for the strange adventure that had become his life. Tomorrow, I'll figure out a new plan, he muttered, closing his eyes. Maybe I'll even build a more fortified shelter, one that can withstand a goat invasion. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Bob drifted off to sleep, dreaming of wild boars, mischievous monkeys, and the delightful unpredictability of island life. Each day was a new opportunity for chaos, and he was determined to embrace it all. One coconut, one adventure, and one laugh at a time. And so, as the waves lapped gently against the shore and the animals roamed freely, Bob settled into the rhythm of his island existence, ready for whatever wild escapade awaited him in the days to come. As the first light of dawn broke over the island, Bob stirred awake to the familiar sounds of the jungle, birds chirping, the distant crash of waves, and Bandit's excited chattering. Good morning, my furry alarm clock, Bob greeted, stretching his arms and yawning. Ready for another day of survival and shenanigans? Bob pushed himself up from his makeshift bed, a pile of palm fronds that had somehow survived the chaos of the previous days. He stared out at the beach, where the tide was slowly receding. What's on the agenda today? More tropical fruit adventures? A daring exploration of the other side of the island? Or perhaps I'll finally figure out how to build a proper toilet. He chuckled at the last thought, knowing that his current method was more of a find a bush and hope for the best situation. After a quick breakfast of coconut water and some mystery berries, thankfully bug-free this time, Bob decided to venture into the jungle once more. Today could be the day I find a treasure map or something equally ridiculous, he announced, pumping his fist in the air in a gesture of faux bravado. Adventure awaits. With Bandit perched on his shoulder, Bob headed into the thick foliage. Keep an eye out for treasure, little buddy, he said, navigating through the underbrush. Or at least keep an eye out for anything that looks edible. As they trekked deeper into the jungle, Bob admired the vibrant colors around him, flowers blooming in every hue imaginable, towering trees swaying gently in the breeze. You know, if I ever write a book about my life, I'll call it Surviving Paradise, A Guide to Tropical Living, he joked to Bandit, who simply tilted his head in confusion. After a while, Bob stumbled upon a small clearing filled with strange, glowing fruits hanging from the branches of the trees. What in the world is this? He wondered aloud, moving closer to inspect the bizarre fruits. They were unlike anything he had seen before, bright purple with a luminescent sheen. Should I eat it? Or should I wait for a goat to try it first? Just then, a loud crash interrupted his thoughts. Bob whipped around to see a wild boar charging toward him, snorting and looking as determined as ever. Not again! I can't handle another boar confrontation, he exclaimed, scrambling backward. In a moment of sheer panic, he grabbed one of the strange fruits and hurled it at the boar. Here, have a snack! The fruit hit the boar squarely in the snout, and it paused, bewildered by the sudden projectile. That's right. You want a piece of this? To Bob's astonishment, the boar sniffed the fruit, then took a cautious bite. It chewed slowly, snorting in curiosity. No way! It actually likes it? Bob exclaimed, watching in disbelief as the boar munched on the fruit, clearly enjoying the unexpected treat. I'm a fruit supplier now! Feeling emboldened, Bob took a few more fruits and tossed them toward the boar, who eagerly gobbled them up. Well, at least I've made a new friend, he chuckled, waving his hands dramatically. I should start a fruit distribution service for wild animals. As Bob enjoyed the ridiculousness of the moment, he turned to see Bandit eyeing the boar warily. Don't worry, Bandit. I'm not going to let it steal our food, he reassured his monkey companion. We're in this together. The boar, now fully engaged, began to sniff around the clearing for more fruit, oblivious to Bob's presence. You know, I could really use a boar as a bodyguard, Bob contemplated, watching as the wild pig happily munched away. It would definitely make for some interesting stories. But just as Bob was settling into this unexpected friendship, he heard another crash nearby. What now? He groaned, turning to see a group of monkeys swinging through the trees, their eyes fixed on the boar and the bounty of fruits. Great! The monkey army has arrived. The monkeys landed in the clearing, chattering excitedly as they observed the boar and the strange fruit. Hey! This is my territory! Bob shouted, waving his arms and attempting to establish dominance. You can't just come in here and start raiding! But the monkeys were undeterred, climbing down and beginning to grab the fruit with reckless abandon. Not cool, guys. You're ruining my business, Bob exclaimed, half laughing and half frustrated. In a moment of inspiration, he took another handful of the glowing fruits and tossed them into the air. Look over here. Fresh fruit, he shouted, hoping to divert their attention. The monkeys, intrigued, began to chase the flying fruits, leaving Bob and the boar alone again. Phew! That was close, he sighed, turning back to the boar, who was still happily munching away. All right, pal, let's make a pact. You keep eating the fruit, and I'll keep bringing it to you. Deal? The boar snorted in agreement, and Bob felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. I can't believe I'm negotiating with a wild animal over fruit, he laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. Feeling accomplished, Bob decided it was time to head back to his shelter. Let's get you some more coconuts, shall we? He said to the boar, leading the way back toward the beach. "You're going to be my most loyal companion yet." As they walked, Bob couldn't help but feel a sense of joy. Life on the island was harsh, but it was also filled with unexpected moments of laughter and camaraderie. "Who would have thought I'd end up befriending a boar?" he mused, Bandit swinging along beside him. Once back at the beach, Bob gathered a few coconuts and settled down to relax. He cracked one open, enjoying the cool water inside. "This is the life, huh?" he said, looking at Bandit and the boar, who were now sharing the coconuts. "Just us against the world." But just as he was about to enjoy his coconut, he heard an ominous rustling from the bushes nearby. "What now?" he groaned, glancing over to see a group of goats emerging from the jungle, bleating loudly and making a beeline for the fruit pile. "Seriously? You've got to be kidding me!" The goats began to munch on the leftover fruit, clearly pleased with their newfound buffet. Bob threw his hands up in exasperation. "This is ridiculous. It's like a wildlife invasion." Deciding that the best course of action was to embrace the chaos, Bob leaned back against the sand. "All right, fine. Everyone can have a slice of the pie, or a piece of the fruit salad, as it were," he shouted, waving his arms dramatically. "Welcome to Bob's Island Feast. No reservations required." The goats, boars, and Bandit gathered around, each of them enjoying the unexpected communal meal. "I can't believe I'm sharing my food with an entire zoo," Bob laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is not how I envisioned my island life." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the beach, Bob felt a sense of contentment wash over him. "You know what? I wouldn't trade this for anything," he said, glancing at the chaotic scene before him. "Life may be harsh, but it's also filled with laughter and unexpected friends." With the sounds of the jungle surrounding him and the sight of his motley crew enjoying the feast, Bob realized that he had found something truly special on this deserted island. Each day was a new adventure, and he was determined to embrace the wildness that came with it. As the stars twinkled overhead, Bob settled into the sand, feeling grateful for the bizarre life he had created. "Here's to another day of chaos, laughter, and the occasional wild boar," he toasted to the night sky, raising an imaginary glass. And so, as the waves crashed gently against the shore and the animals roamed freely, Bob embraced his new normal, ready for whatever wild escapade awaited him in the days to come. Each day was an opportunity for more laughter, more absurdity, and the kind of adventure that would make even the most seasoned travelers envious. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a fiery orange, Bob settled in for the evening, surrounded by his newfound animal friends. The boar was happily munching on the leftover fruit, Bandit was swinging playfully from a low-hanging branch, and the goats were grazing contentedly nearby, oblivious to the chaos they had caused earlier. "Welcome to the wildest dinner party ever," Bob chuckled to himself, shaking his head in disbelief. "What a life," he said aloud, raising an imaginary glass to the motley crew. "To the friends we never expected to find." He glanced at the boar, who seemed to nod in agreement, and Bandit, who was now munching on a coconut shell, clearly the only one of the bunch with any sense of decorum. "You might be the only one with class here, buddy," he laughed. Feeling inspired by the vibrant colors of the sunset, Bob decided it was time for a little creative expression. "Tonight, I shall create art," he declared dramatically, glancing around for materials. He gathered seashells, bits of driftwood, and colorful berries, determined to make a masterpiece that would capture the essence of his island life. "I'll call it Stranded Serenity." As he worked, he found himself getting lost in the rhythm of the island. The gentle lapping of the waves, the occasional call of a distant bird, and the rustling of leaves created a soothing backdrop for his artistic endeavor. "If only I had a canvas, or a brush, or a clue," he muttered, chuckling to himself. But who needs those when you have imagination? Just as he was about to add the finishing touches to his artwork, a loud bleat interrupted his concentration. He turned to see one of the goats sniffing curiously at his creation. "Hey, get away from that!" he shouted, waving his arms. The goat seemed unfazed, munching on a nearby piece of driftwood instead. "You are the least cultured of all my guests," Bob exclaimed, shaking his head in disbelief. With a resigned sigh, Bob decided to let the goat have its fun. "Fine, munch away. Just don't expect an invitation to the gallery opening. He laughed, watching as the goat happily gnawed on his driftwood sculpture, clearly more interested in the wood than the berries and shells. As the sun finally set, Bob lit a small fire to ward off the evening chill. He sat cross-legged on the sand, feeling a sense of peace as he gazed at the flickering flames. "This is the life, isn't it?" he mused aloud, glancing at Bandit, who was perched on a nearby log, watching the fire with wide-eyed fascination. "Just you, me, and a bunch of wild animals that are somehow more civilized than I am." After a few moments of silence, Bob decided it was time to indulge in some self-reflection. "You know, Bandit, I never thought I'd end up here," he began, staring into the fire. "A plane crash, stranded on a deserted island, surrounded by creatures that would likely eat my lunch if I'm not careful. But somehow, I think I'm starting to like it." At that moment, a loud crash echoed from the bushes, and Bob jumped to his feet, heart racing. "What now?" he shouted, half expecting a pack of boars or an army of goats to come charging through. Instead, out waddled a large tortoise, moving at a leisurely pace, completely unfazed by Bob's presence. "Well, well, if it isn't the Grand Tortoise," Bob exclaimed, trying to keep a straight face. "What brings you to my humble abode? Looking for a place to crash?" The tortoise blinked slowly, seemingly considering Bob's words, before plodding over to the fire, clearly interested in the warmth. "You know, I could use a friend who moves a little slower," Bob mused, chuckling. "Maybe you can help me with my daily yoga routine, tortoise style." As the night wore on, Bob felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He had built an unusual family of misfits, each with its quirks and personalities. "Who would have thought my biggest supporters would be a monkey, a boar, and a tortoise?" he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Feeling inspired, Bob decided to share stories with his newfound friends. "Gather around, everyone. Let me tell you about the time I almost became a professional coconut juggler," he began, launching into a dramatic retelling of his initial attempts at coconut acrobatics, complete with exaggerated gestures and sound effects. Bandit listened intently, occasionally chattering in response, while the tortoise seemed to nod along, albeit at a very slow pace. The boar, on the other hand, was more interested in the remaining fruit, snorting occasionally as if to say, "Enough with the stories? Where's the food?" As Bob recounted his tales of mishaps and triumphs, laughter echoed through the night, mingling with the sounds of the jungle. It was a strange and beautiful symphony, a reminder that even in the most chaotic of circumstances, joy could still be found. But just as the night began to settle, Bob heard a distant rumble of thunder. "Oh, great, a storm," he said, glancing up at the darkening sky. "Just what I needed, a little island drama to spice things up." He hurried to gather his supplies, making sure his shelter was secure and that his precious fruit was stashed away safely. "All right, everyone, time to hunker down," he called, motioning for Bandit and the tortoise to follow him into his makeshift shelter. The boar, however, seemed less enthusiastic, snorting as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." As the first raindrops began to fall, Bob huddled inside, feeling the humidity rise around him. "This is it, my friends. The ultimate test of survival," he shouted, trying to maintain morale. "We faced boars, goats, and rogue monkeys. Now we face the mighty storm." He could hear the wind picking up outside, rustling the palm fronds above. "Just hang tight, everyone. A little rain never hurt anyone," he encouraged, trying to keep the spirits high. The rain began to pour, drumming loudly on the roof of his shelter. Bob watched as the water pooled outside, turning the ground into a muddy mess. "Well, at least I won't have to worry about watering the plants for a while," he chuckled to himself, leaning back against the wall of his shelter. As the storm raged on, Bob felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. "You know what? I think I've earned a nap," he said, yawning widely. "Just a quick power nap while the world goes wild outside." He drifted off to sleep, lulled by the rhythm of the rain and the sounds of his chaotic animal companions. And as the storm rumbled on, Bob dreamed of new adventures, wild animals, and perhaps even a day when he would find a way off this island, if only to return to the comfort of civilization and a reliable cup of coffee. But until then, he was determined to embrace the wildness of his existence, taking each day as it came, filled with laughter, chaos, and the unexpected friendships that had blossomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. With that thought, Bob surrendered to sleep, ready for whatever awaited him in the morning.